Hello fellow pilots, I'm Major Payne and this is next episode of How to Play. In this episode we will talk about how to play BVP 210, which is German Tier 8 multi-role fighter in German Tech Tree. But first let's talk about the history of this project. I'm saying project because this plane never left the drawing board and remain as a project only, never been built any prototype even. Let's get into it. The history of this project begins at the beginning of the 1944 when massive bombing raids were taking place by the US Army Air Force and RAF Bomber Command on the scale never seen before. Jet fighters like Messerschmitt Me-262 at the time about to enter service had a clear performance advantage over the Allied aircraft, but were expensive and difficult to keep operational. This led to idea of a much less expensive design that could be easily built and easy to fly because Germans did not have time to train pilots at the time. This became the genesis of this emergency fighter program as a part of shifting production to defense interceptor fighters. Blom & Voss company, shipbuilder and large aeroplane maker, entered the Volksjäger program in September 1944. Translation would be a people's fighter. They present very futuristic design, extremely compact and streamlined for expected high-speed flying. Proposed engine was BMW 003 A1. Wings had a 30 degrees angle and the fuselage did not have any tail surfaces on it. These were installed at the wingtips and slightly cranked down. Proposed armament was typical and it was two 30mm cannons or two 20mm cannons, exactly the same as in a game. The BVP eventually suffered, like most of the Blom & Voss projects, simply was not enough interest in radical design at this stage of war. Back into the game, we have opportunity to fly this thanks to Wargaming and see how this fighter would look like and how it would perform in a battle. Let's get into the details and we start from firepower. This plane have two options and first is two 30mm cannons and then is two 20mm cannons. I highly recommend this second option for two 20mm because the range of them are 800 meters plus a rate of fire which is amazing 700 per minute. For comparison, other fighters at this tier with 20mm cannons, they have a rate of fire around 420 on those 20s. So it's of course a matter of your choice or preference. Those 230, of course, they are still effective, and I play with them as well, and I've been effective in them with them, but it's much more difficult to connect them with the target, so and the range of them as well. So that's why I decide to go for 220s. On paper, it looks like you have only 23 points on this scale. So the only plane which have worse than this is actually J21RB, which we discussed on previous episode. But it's not really the case. To talk about this firepower in this plane, you have to add those rockets into this. So this plane have 24 air-to-air rockets, R4M, and on tier 8 there is only one more plane with air-to-air rockets, and this is a German heavy fighter Me-262. So other than that, no one else have those air-to-air rockets. And what they give you just huge advantage in any head-on attack. Basically, if any other plane head-on go for head-on attack with you, or heavy fighter, or multi-role, or light fighter, whatever it is, you are able to take it out that with those rockets. I usually fire them all, or at least 2 salvos of 8. So it's actually never happened that someone survived that, and like 99% if someone not going for any defensive maneuver keep going straight on with you, it's just 100% kill basically. So those rockets have range 1390 meters, which is pretty good, and the reload time is 60 seconds. I believe you can, of course, after specialization you can go down with this number. So this is his main weapon, I would say, and this plane being designed for fighter, and that's the multi-role fighter, but it have to go like fighter, just hunting down other multi-role fighters, ground attackers, and fighters. Of course, there's an option if someone wants to use those two heavy rockets to engage ground targets, but it's really not, this plane really not been designed to use those rockets. It's been designed to use those air-to-air rockets basically. So I highly recommend to go for air-to-air instead of this ground. Next we have survivability, and this plane have 300 HP, which is the worst result from all other multi-role fighters, but it's not such a big problem in this case, because you can win any head-on engagement with everyone with those rockets, which we mentioned before. I have here a little bit less HP because I using special module for maneuverability, and that's cost me 2.2% of HP less. So still, that's not concern me. 300 HP is not, of course, it's better to have more than less, but it's really not such a disadvantage that's gonna be such a big problem. If you have any head-on attack with any other multi-role fighter which have more HP, but you still can fire your rockets and hit him before he even get into the range of his cannon. So that's why I think this is not a big problem, of course. No, that's actually it for survivability. Not much we can say about this more. Let's move into the speed now. And speed is compared to another multi-role fighter is more or less the same. So it's not a big difference between other multi-role fighters on this tier. But there's one problem with the speed, and this is the boost. When you have this plane clear with no bonuses, no pilot, no extra equipment, this boost is only 10 seconds. And I have even less because I have extra equipment which give me better cooldown of the engine, maximum speed, and so on and so on. But that cost me this 1 second. But anyway, it's 10 seconds. But 10 seconds is really the worst actually result from other multi-role fighters, and it's actually less than some fighters. So, for example, American P.210 on tier 8 have 12 seconds boosts. And there's many others which have more or less the same, like German fighters, Messerschmitt Me209 or TA152. They both the same speed and boost. So it's pity because this is actually jet engine, and it looks like those piston engine fighters have the same speed or just slightly less. So the problem is that if you find yourself in a fight with that kind of fighter, and if you're not able to take him out in first surprise attack or head-on attack, whatever it is, then you find yourself in trouble because you can't outmaneuver these fighters and you can't outrun them. So you have to be extra careful when you deal with those planes, specifically if there's a human player. So the speed is a slightly problem here with this boost. So there is some help here for that, and that will be a special equipment which is extra cooldown for the engine. I use that on this plane, and that give you like extra 10 seconds of your boost, and that's make a difference. So in my opinion, this equipment is like must have for this plane. So yes, you have to be extra careful when you deal with these German fighters and American fighters, and like Russian fighters are not that such a problem because they doesn't have such a boost, and they're not really fast. So they much more maneuverability capables, but Japanese as well, the same thing. They're very maneuverable, but they're not really fast. And the Spitfire have 10 seconds boost as well, but in this case, like 90% of players improve the maneuverability in those planes, not the speed. So most likely Spitfire won't be able to catch up with you, but still you have to be careful as well. So that's it for the speed. So it is a problem because there is not enough boost in it, and you have to keep that on mind when you engage maneuverable German fighters with high speed. capabilities basically. Now we are getting to the maneuverability and altitude performance. So what you need to know here is that American multi-role fighters and Russian multi-role fighters are less maneuverable. So to defeat them, you simply can get into the turning fight, and by using your average turn time, you can get into the tails and take them out. So you don't have to be worried about those planes, but the planes which are concern you is Hawker Tempest, Seafunk, J7W1 and J21RB. Let's talk about Seafunk and Tempest. So those two British multi-role fighters, they have on paper the same average turn time, 10.8 seconds, but they have much less stall speed. Seafunk have 120 and Tempest have 140 when you have 200. So this is a big difference. So what's going to happen in turn fight, they're going to slow down. If we're talking, of course, about two equals plane and two equal pilots. So if they slow down, they start making those circles smaller and smaller, and by that they're gonna get into your tail and take you out. So what you can do in this kind of engagement, because you cannot outrun them because of the speed is more or less the same. If you find yourself that you have to fight with this plane, and it's a human player, so I advise the defensive maneuver, which is called rolling scissors. And the reason why you can apply this maneuver, this defensive maneuver, is that your rate of roll is 180 degrees per second. And for comparison, you have this Hawker Tempest, which is 110 degrees per second, and Seafunk 130 degrees per second. So they have much less. So you're simply gonna roll faster and start your turn faster into the enemy, and that's give you this extra advantage. So if you're lucky enough, you may get into the position to give a shot and or destroy or damage the enemy plane, and in each turn you're gonna close on it and get better position. So I have it here example for you of flat scissors, but in this particular plane BVP 210, I prefer if you're gonna use the not horizontal scissors, just vertical scissors, because of your altitude performance, which are much better than the planes which we're just discussing. So it's much better to use this not horizontal, just vertical, and it's actually something like a energy contest. So in each turn you gain extra and you get better position each turn. So that's the example of the vertical now. In World of Warplanes, I find this maneuver as very hard to apply, but it is possible, specifically in the planes which have such a good rate of roll. The easiest way to explain this maneuver is just simply turn into the enemy, and then instead of going and keep turning, you just roll over and turn again into the enemy, and roll over and into the enemy, and so on until you get a better position to get the shot. In case of fighting with J7W1 and or J21RB, you can use your altitude performance, because those rolling scissors are good as well, but because of the J7W1 have such a low stall speed, 120, it may not be enough, and I prefer if you just go climb, use your altitude performance. So it's simply J7 and J21RB, they just simply fall off the sky quicker than you if you just climb enough. Like you have optimum altitude for BVP is 1800, and for those two is 1400. The same is with the maximum altitude, is very much better. So you can use that, force the enemy to climb after you, and then just keep looking on them until they cannot keep up, and they will simply fall, and you just turn back and re-engage them from the higher altitude. Now we talk about the tactics, how to best use this plane in a battle, and as you can see here, head-on rockets goes very well. Those two 20mm cannons do the job very well, as you can see. I was talking earlier about this high altitude performance. which this plane have, but it only in compared to other multi-role fighter, you can't really get into the chase with some heavy fighters or stuff like that. So any operations on high altitude is no. And again, head-on attacks, yes, yes. Overall, plane is very good. I keep it myself in a hangar. I like this very much. But as a multi-role fighter, have some limitation in terms of tactic. You cannot go to a mining factory, for example, on your own, or even the rocket base, because if you're on your own, over the rocket base you have only 2 heavy fighters. Even if you take them out, still have some points. There are still some points which need to be gained in terms of flipping over the zone. Not mention about the factory, which basically have no aerial targets over it. So you're simply gonna waste your time over there if you have no enemy planes in a sector. So you need to plan your move in advance, and you need to think about enemy ground attackers, where they're gonna go. And if you are sure that the enemy ground attackers will go for a specific area like mining factory, then you can go there and take them out. That's going to help your team to flip over the zone. A good job would be as well if you defend sectors which your team already have, like mining factory or rocket base, against enemy ground attackers or multi-role fighters, and any actually area targets. You can try to defend the sectors. That's a typical role for this plane. And of course, if you want to go and flip over the zones, just remember you cannot go on your own on some specific areas where you need to take out some ground targets in order to flip over the zone. So taking out the zones, defend the zones, that's a typical job of yours in a battle. Like bomber formation is not for you. Like bomber formations for this plane are too difficult target because of your low HP and not a big firepower. And those rockets, obviously, they're very good against aerial target, but not for the bomber formation. They doesn't make enough damage. They somehow you can. It's really hard to hit the bomber with it. Of course, you can use it because the reload is very fast. So if there is nothing else like close to you, of course you can engage the bomber formation, but it's not recommended specifically to go for it, like to go and take out the bombers. It's not the best options for this plane. Eventually, maybe just one bomber, just in order to keep the sector for a little bit longer, like mining factory, for example, and that factory can reload that extra 80 points thanks to that, of course. And if you find yourself in a situation where you have to engage a plane like Me-262 or another BVP head-on, then it's actually a matter of timing when you're going to release your rockets and when you're going to do a defensive maneuver to avoid enemy rockets. So this is just a matter of your timing and skills. Now that will be it for this video. I hope you enjoy, and if you like this, please leave a like and subscribe, and guys, see you in the next one. Take care.